Om Shri Sai Ram. I offer my most reverential pranams at the lotus feet of our founder chancellor, Bhagavan Shri Sathya Sai Baba, esteemed members of the Shri Sathya Sai Central Trust, respected Vice Chancellor, Registrar, Controller of Examinations, Directors of the campuses, Dean of Research and Education, respected fraternity of the university, dear students, and all the viewers. It is with great delight and honor that I welcome you all to this World Diabetes Day webinar organized by the Department of Food and Nutritional Sciences, Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning. Before we proceed, we will just have a short presentation of Gayatri Mantra.
तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्
Welcome back. It is well established fact that diabetes is a chronic disorder that requires lifelong management. The number of people with diabetes has really quadrupled since 1980, and the prevalence is increasing worldwide, particularly in low and middle income countries. India is deemed as the world's capital of diabetes, with the diabetic population in the country close to hitting an alarming mark of 69.9 million by 2025. The causes are complex, but one of the main reasons seems to be lack of healthy diet and lifestyle. World Diabetes Day was launched in the year 1991 by the International Diabetes Federation and the WHO in response to the growing concerns about the escalating health threat posed by diabetes. We are privileged to have with us two eminent diabetologists today, Dr. C.B. Sanjeevi, a professor and doctor, and Dr. V. Mohan, a practicing physician and a scientist. Dr. Sanjeevi obtained his MD from the University of Madras in India and his master's in immunology from Imperial College London and PhD from Karolinska Institute. Dr. C.B. Sanjeevi took over as the Vice Chancellor of SSSIHL in 2019. He also heads the research group Diabetes Immunology at Karolinska Institute, Sweden. He has served as a member of the editorial board of Human Immunology. He is a member of several advisory boards and journal He is associate editor for diabetology, and he has also edited a series entitled Immunology of Diabetes. Sir has also received a lot of rewards and recognitions throughout his career. He is the recipient of Pravasi Bharatiya Samman Award in 2017, which is the highest award for a person of Indian origin from the Government of India. I request now Dr. Sanjeevi to kindly deliver his introductory note and also introduce the speaker of today's webinar, Dr. V. Mohan, whose expertise is unparalleled in his field. Thank you. Over to Dr. Sanjeevi.
Sai Ram. My humble pranams at the lotus feet of Bhagwan. It gives me a great pleasure to talk about Dr. Mohan, whom I know for more than 40 years, since my days at the Madras Medical College, as both of us are alumni of Madras Medical College. Dr. Mohan is the chairman and chief of diabetology at Mohan Diabetes Specialty Center in Chennai, and it has more than 48 branches throughout India. It's one of the largest diabetes care centers in India, maybe in the world as well. Mohan is deeply interested in research from his undergraduate medical student days, and he has published more than 1,320 research papers in peer-reviewed journals, which is a record by a practicing doctor anywhere in the world. His work has attracted enormous citations, more than 131 citations for his work. Mohan has trained enormous number of physicians, more than 12,000 physicians and 500 diabetologists during his career. Mohan has received enormous number of awards, more than 180 to be precise. And the most important of them all is B.C. Roy National Award given by the Medical Council of India, Dr. Ambedkar Centenary Award from the Indian Council of Medical Research, and also from our own Sri Satya Sai organization called Sri Satya Sai Dhanvantari Award, which was given to him in 2018. He was conferred the distinguished Harold Rifkin Award by the American Diabetes Association, which is the first for an Indian doctor to receive this award. Mohan also has a lot of contributions towards Swami Seva activities in terms of treating thousands of diabetic patients as well as non-diabetic patients as well in the Satya Sai Seva organizations in Chennai and outside Chennai as well. His extensive contribution in the field of diabetes, in 2012, Dr. Mohan was awarded the prestigious Padma Shri Award, one of the highest civilian awards given by the Government of India. Mohan owes all his success to the blessings of Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba and considers his position as a member of the Board of Trustees of Sri Satya Sai Central Trust as the highest honor he has ever received. His book, Sri Satya Sai Baba Lives On, is an extremely popular among Sai devotees. Dr. Mohan today will be talking about are carbohydrates the main reason for diabetes epidemic in India. With this brief introduction, I welcome Dr. Mohan to deliver his talk. Dr. Mohan.
Om Shri Sai Ram. I offer my most humble, loving and reverential pranams at the divine lotus feet of our Lord and Master, Bhagavan Sri Satya Sai Baba, who is the single force which has united all of us and made us what we are today. And he is also responsible for the universities, the hospitals, and all that he has created, the institutions which bear his name. I am extremely grateful to my good friend, Dr. Sanjeevi, for taking time off amongst his very busy schedule as the Vice Chancellor of the Sri Satya Sai University to be here with us today and for his very kind words of introduction. Thank you, Dr. Sanjeevi. I look forward to look back on all those years of collaboration and friendship that we have shared over the last 4 decades. Thank you, Dr. Srividya, for inviting me to be here today. It may sound strange, but the Anantapur campus is the one campus which I have not visited. I have visited and given talks at the Prashanthi Nilayam campus, as well as the Whitefield campus, the Mudanhalli campus, but not the Anantapur campus. And hence, I'm happy that at least thanks to COVID, we are in this virtual world today, and therefore I'm able to reach out to you all. Let me start my presentation by sharing my slides and offering my humble pranams again to the divine lotus feet of our Lord. So the title of my presentation is Are Carbohydrates the Main Reason for the Diabetes Epidemic in India? And I'll show you how this has great relevance to what Swami has taught me as well. And in fact, I would not have worked in this field at all, but for Swami guiding me. And I'll talk about that. Just to formally thank Dr. Srividya and all the organizing committee of this meeting, and of course the Vice Chancellor as well. This is the structure of my talk. So I'll be talking about the increasing prevalence of diabetes in India, and then try to link it to the excess carbohydrates that we consume in India in relation to prevalence of diabetes, then talk about the incidence of diabetes, so the new onset of diabetes. Prevalence is the percentage of diabetes in the population at any given time, whereas incidence is the number of new cases which get added on. So we have some evidence now regarding the incidence of diabetes as well. Then I'll finally talk about bad carbs and good carbs. So one should not run away with the impression that everything in carbohydrates is bad. That is not true. There are good carbs and there are bad carbs. And then what are the recommendations to reduce the white rice intake, and what else can we take if we reduce that intake? So that's going to be my talk. First, let me talk to you briefly about the prevalence of diabetes, and also how in India the incidence rates are increasing at a much faster rate than in any other country or any other ethnic group. Now, I go to my first slide, where to my father, Professor M. Vishwanathan, who is shown here, who is quite rightly called as the father of diabetology in India, because he started the first diabetic clinic in India in 1948 at the Stanley Medical College and Hospital in Chennai. In 1970, he left the Stanley Medical College and wanted to start something privately on his own. And that was the year 1971 when I joined the Madras Medical College as a first-year medical student. And I did not waste much time because my father said, you can work with me right from day one. So I started working with him right from my first year MBBS days. And this is a slide which is not the exact slide, but a similar slide which I helped him prepare over the years. And in 1972, when the first prevalence study of diabetes was published by the Indian Council of Medical Research, at that time, the prevalence of diabetes in urban cities like Chennai, Trivandrum, Delhi, Mumbai, and so on, Ahmedabad, and so on, was about 2%. Whereas in rural areas, it was varied between 0.5 to 1.5%, average about 1%. So my father had an interesting theory. He said, we seem to have the genes for diabetes, and therefore there's a potential for diabetes to grow very markedly in our population. But right now, it seems to be the migrant Indians who are getting diabetes, because he was in touch with colleagues from all over the world. And looking at the studies over the years, 1980s, 90s, and so on, every study that was done in the world showed that the Indians living in that place had more diabetes than the local population. For example, if you take the UK, in 1989, 11% of the Indians had diabetes, whereas only about half of the white population and the black population at that time had diabetes. Similarly, in Singapore, Malaysia, Fiji, Tanzania, South Africa, Mauritius, wherever the local population was compared to the Indians had the highest rates of diabetes. So his hypothesis was that Indians, when they migrate abroad, they become richer, they put on weight, and therefore they get diabetes. Whereas the Indians in India, it is not that high. That was his hypothesis. But then things started to change. And as you can see, the prevalence of diabetes in India also started going up from 2%, which I presented earlier, to 4, 5, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 18, 20, 25% is the latest which we reported in the year 2015. This is a study funded by the NIH, where we looked at the prevalence of diabetes in Chennai, Delhi, and Karachi, in 3 cities. And today the prevalence of diabetes is between 22 to 25%. This is actually in 2015. Now it could have gone up even higher. So almost a 10-fold or 11-fold increase in prevalence of diabetes over 40-year period. And you can see in rural areas also, it's going up from 1%, 2%, 6%, 14%, 16%. Now in rural Kerala, for example, which just finished 3-4 months ago through the INDIAB study, it's over 20%, almost 24% of the rural people in Kerala have diabetes compared to 22% in the urban areas. So actually, it's more in the rural areas now. So rural areas are not left behind as well. Now, when this came, we asked a question. So what about my father's hypothesis? If it is already 25% here, what is it in the West? Has it reached 30%, 40%, 50%? What is it there? Okay. So we had an opportunity to study this and compare our data with what's called as the Masala study in the USA. Masala has nothing to do with masala. It's a mediators of atherosclerosis in South Asians living in Los Angeles and in California. So that is the study, Masala study. Now in Masala, they have data only from 40 years upwards. We in all our studies, we use 20 years and upwards. So to compare it, we used our CARS data, which use very similar methodology. In fact, some of the collaborators are common between these two. And we looked at the 40 to 84 years age group. Shown in red is the Indians living in Chennai. Now, this is a representative population of Chennai. And this is a representative population of the Indians living in San Francisco. And you can see that throughout, at every age group, at 40, 45, 50, 60, and so on, it's the Indians living in Chennai who now have a higher prevalence of diabetes compared to the Indians in San Francisco. So while my father was right then, things have now changed. The clock has now gone a complete circle. And today, prevalence rates in urban India are actually higher than the Indians living in urban United States or UK and so on. Now, why is this? Because I think their awareness has increased. They are of a higher socioeconomic status. They exercise more. They eat less rice and less carbohydrate. They have started eating more vegetables. They have started bothering about their body weight and taking preventive steps. And therefore, they have slowed down the rise of diabetes. In India, we are still grappling with the communicable disease. We are right now in the midst of COVID. Before that, it was tuberculosis or something else. So we are not yet focusing on diabetes. So the sad truth is that we have more people with diabetes in India today than in the Indians living in any of the foreign countries. I don't know whether my father would have expected this because he died before these big changes came. Now, the same study, if you just look at Chennai itself and look at different age groups, I mentioned that 20 to 25% of the total population in Chennai has diabetes, but that is including those who are 20 years and above. If you take people who are 40, 45, 50, and 60 years of age, shown in red is pre-diabetes and shown in yellow is diabetes. So you can see that age 50, 55, almost 44% of the population has diabetes. And above 60 years, 53% of the population, of the whole population in Chennai, above 65 years, has diabetes. And if you look at pre-diabetes, again, you can add another 20, 25%. So if you add at age, say 65 or 64, if you take, almost 68% of the population or 73% of the population has either diabetes or pre-diabetes. Only the rest of them are normal. That means only about 30% or so are normal at that age group. So that's how much the diabetes has increased in a metropolitan city like Chennai. And I will hasten to add that it's not any different in Bangalore or Hyderabad or Mumbai, Calcutta or Delhi. Now, based on these figures, and also our ICMR INDIAB study, which I'll just briefly talk about, in 2017, the International Diabetes Federation said that there were 73 million people with diabetes in India. They increased that number to 77 million in the year 2019. And the projection was that by the year 2025, India will have 134 million people with diabetes. That means this number is almost going to double in the next 20, 25 years or so. And I feel that these numbers are actually underestimates because we are reaching the numbers projected by IDF and WHO much before the actual date. So if they say 2045, probably in 2030 or 35, we'll actually reach that number. That's the rate at which we are growing. Now, where do all these data come from? It is not just from taking from Chennai and then projecting it to the whole country. We have been fortunate to have been involved in a decade-long study called as the ICMR India Diabetes Study or the ICMR INDIAB study for short. This is funded by the Indian Council of Medical Research. This is one of their flagship projects, one of the largest projects done by the ICMR and the Department of Health Research, Ministry of Health. The basis for the study was that it was my daughter, Dr. Anjana, when she was doing her MBBS, she came and told me, Papa, what is this Chennai you're going on? Chennai is not India. So I said, what do you want to do? So she said, I want to study the whole country. I said, are you crazy? Whole country? Do you know what India is? It's so big. She said, no, give me a chance and I'll do it. So when she finished her MD, I kept her away until she finished her MD. Then when she finished her MD, I talked to ICMR and they said, it's a great idea if you can take it up. So then she said, I'm going to take it up. And for the last 10 years, she has been driving this whole study. In fact, she's traveled to every state, every corner of the country to do the study. So the total sample size is 124,000 people, representative of India's 1.36 billion people. It covers all the 29 states and 2 union territories. Now, there are several publications from India, but this one in Lancet Diabetes was published in 2017 with my daughter as the first author. And this represented 15 states. So when we finished 15 states, we thought it fit to publish. It was a kind of halfway mark. And you can see, and this is what she had predicted. And she said, well, studying just Tamil Nadu or studying Chennai, you cannot project it to India because there are wide differences in diabetes. Look at the prevalence of diabetes in Bihar, 4%, going up to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. At that time, this Tamil Nadu was the first to be done. That was 10 years ago. It was 10%. Now 10% includes urban, rural, all the villages and everything. But even at that time, the Union Territory of Chandigarh was 13%. The latest states which you have done now after 10 years, because 10 years is a big jump. In Goa today, in Kerala today, the prevalence rates of the whole state is about 20%. Now we are redoing Tamil Nadu to see how much has caught up in 10 years' time. And with that, we'll be able to project to the whole country, the states which we did even 10 years ago. Now, another thing that you know is that the prevalence of pre-diabetes is also very high. Look at the prevalence of diabetes was high. Look at pre-diabetes. Now, what does that tell you? If pre-diabetes is very high, these are the people who convert to diabetes fast. And therefore, that is why the prevalence rates of diabetes are going on. Now, once pre-diabetes goes down, as you saw at the 60 years age group, there's very little pre-diabetes. They've all converted to diabetes. So if you have high pre-diabetes, it means that more and more the epidemic is going to grow. But to really look at whether the incidence of diabetes is increasing or not, you have to do incidence studies. This is again a study which my daughter was the primary author. And what we did was we had a study called as the Chennai Urban Rural Epidemiological Study. This one a large epidemiological study of 26,000 people whom we studied in Chennai. We were very fortunate to follow up these people over a 10-year period. And the same individuals we followed up, the same set of people we followed up to see what is happening to the incident diabetes, incident hypertension, incident cardiovascular disease, obesity, and also the incident complications in this particular study. So in 2015, we published the first incident or longitudinal follow-up study to find out the incidence of diabetes in India. Now, what we did was, this is a very complicated study. I'm not going to go into it. There are 4 or 5 phases of the study, just to tell you how representative of Chennai this was. So we go house to house, just like ICMR is in INDIAB is representative of whole India. Cures is more completely representative of Chennai. And this one study has produced close to 160 publications. So what we did was, we went to those who did not have diabetes in the year 2001, 2003 when we started. We had done OGTTs on them, glucose tolerance tests on them, and they had, some of them had pre-diabetes, some had diabetes. We took them out, and then those who had normal glucose tolerance, we followed them up with a repeat GTT after 10 years, and the same individuals. We had about 1,000 people. Now, we were astonished to find that among these 1,000 people who did not have diabetes, 10 years later, this is the pre-diabetes. Either you have impaired glucose tolerance or impaired fasting glucose, or both, or any one of them. So if you take all the pre-diabetes together, out of these 1,000, 277 had already developed pre-diabetes. That means the conversion rate was 29 per 1,000 person year. So you can see within 10 years, so many have moved from normal to pre-diabetes. But what was more shocking to us was, during that same 10-year period, 209 people representing 22.2 per 1,000 person years of follow-up had converted to diabetes itself. So this means that they not only developed pre-diabetes, they went into diabetes itself within this 10-year period. And that's why I said the conversion rates are very fast in our population. In fact, it's one of the fastest conversion rates reported in the world. Now, we also had pre-diabetics at that time in the year 2000, 2001. We went back and looked at what happened to them. Did they convert to diabetes or not? And here are 5 comparative studies: the Danish study, the Nauru population, the American Indian population, our population, and then the Pima Indians who are really obese in India. And so when you look at the conversion rates of pre-diabetes to diabetes, we were luckily in the 2nd place, okay? And Pima Indians were higher than us. The others were all much lower than us. But then there's a confounder here. And the confounder is, if you look at our mean BMI, it is only 25 as compared to the Pima Indians who are 32, which means they are so much bigger, so much fatter than us, so much more obese than us. And that is why their conversion rate is faster. If you just do a statistical calculation, if you standardize the BMI, you'll find that we are actually, the Indians have the highest conversion rate. So conversion from normal glucose tolerance to pre-diabetes, we are the highest. From pre-diabetes to diabetes also, we are the highest. And this is not just in our population. Here is a study published from the UK in Lancet Diabetes by Naveed Sattar and Gill, Jason Gill, where if you look at the conversion, the red is the South Asians, mostly Indians in Europe, in UK, and the blue is the Europeans, the white population living in UK. Now, if you look at the conversion rates, you can see how much faster from normal to pre-diabetes to diabetes they are converting, whereas the Europeans take much more time. And they worked out that 5 to 10 years earlier, the South Asians, meaning Indians, will develop diabetes. And the progression rate is much, much faster in our population compared to the white population. So that was an exact corroboration of our study. Now, around that time, before we actually published these data, I had the opportunity to be good fortune to be called by Bhagavan for an interview. And in that interview, he suddenly turned to me and he said, "Doctor," he used to always call me doctor, "Doctor, why is there an increase in diabetes in our country?" Now, at that time, I had not done a single study on carbohydrate or rice, and I was working more on the genetic aspects, type 2 diabetes, gene discovery. I was working in that. So I thought probably we just published one of our big papers in a very top journal in Nature Genetics. So I thought, oh, probably Swami is talking about that. So I said, "Is it our genes, Swami?" I asked him. So he just smiled and he said, "Genes? What was the prevalence of diabetes 30 years ago?" He asked me. So I said, "It was 2%. And he said, "Now, at that time, it was some 18% or 16%. So I said, "It's now increased so much, Swami." I said, "Did the genes change in 30 years? He asked me. "Did all your genes change in 30 years? How can it be genes?" He asked me. Then I realized the foolishness of what I said, Genes cannot change in 30 years. So the increase in diabetes cannot be due to genes. And because in my father's time, whatever genes are the same genes only we are having now, okay? So then I made another attempt. I said, "Is it because physical activity has come down, Swami? People are not walking." "Partly correct, but that's not the full answer," he said. Then I accepted defeat. And I told Swami, "Swami, you teach me, Swami, I don't know." I said, "See, in my own field, the only field that I work in, I don't know anything, and Swami knows everything." Okay? That is why he is called as the scientist of scientists. He is a doctor of doctors. He is a superintendent of superintendents, and he knows everything. What is that Swami does not know? Then he told me, it is white rice. Rice is being consumed in our population, and that is the reason for the increase in diabetes. And then he also said, "You have the data with you, but you have not looked at it," he said. Now, how does he know that I have the data? I myself have not thought about it at all. And here is Swami telling me that I have the data. Go back and analyze it. You will see that with increasing rice, diabetes will increase. You have the data. Go and look at it, he said. Then I said, "Okay, Swami, I'll definitely look at it." Okay. That started my journey with the carbohydrate story. That same day, I called my team from Puttaparthi itself. I called my team And I said, what are you guys doing with the data? Swami says, you've not even looked at the data. Please look at our data in relation to the increase in diabetes in Chennai. I didn't have incidence data at that time. So I said, look at the prevalence and see whether the carbohydrate intake is linked to it or not. So the question is it due to genetic or environmental? I told you genetic factors. This was our paper on Nature Genetics, actually, where we actually saw 6 new genes. But that was obviously not the reason for that. Now, what about environmental factors? So Swami said that it is due to the excess carbohydrate in the form of white rice. And if you think about it, see, our lifestyle has completely changed. See, we used to, carry loads on our head. We used to work very hard. Today, the only thing we carry on our heads is a cell phone. Okay, what other weight do we lift? Nothing we do these days. Children used to play in the field. Today, they're all sitting and playing computer games. Okay, and then this is the frugal meals that we used to eat those days. The amount of rice was less. They used to eat a lot of side dishes, and that is what we used to eat those days. Whereas today, we're eating all kinds of junk foods, more carbohydrate, more fat, sugar, salt, everything. So definitely there's an increase in the glycemic load. So the question, and of course, there's decreased physical activity, there's urbanization, we don't know whether pollution or something else is working, but this is all due to being more affluent. Today we are more affluent, therefore we do all that. So the first question to ask is there any evidence for this increased calories and this glycemic load? Because that is what Swami wanted me to look at. So let us look at the data in relation to carbohydrate and prevalence of diabetes. As I told you, from 1971, there was a steady increase in the cities in the prevalence of diabetes. These are all prevalence studies. This is not incidence studies. Okay. So within that period, what was the change in the carbohydrate? So we looked at, in 2009, we published this paper. I think it was in 2007 that he told me. Quickly, we got to work on that. And I used to joke that actually Swami should be the first author of this paper because it was entirely his idea, but for that, we would not have worked. So what we basically did was, we went back to our CURE study where we had collected a lot of data on diet, but we had not analyzed it. And we simply looked at the glycemic load in the population, the glycemic index of the food groups that we had, and mostly the carbohydrate. And of course, in Chennai, it was all rice, rice, rice. In fact, more than 50% of the entire day's carbohydrates of calories comes from carbohydrate from white rice. So let's look at the data. So if you divide the population of Chennai into 4 quartiles, the first quartile, they take the least carbohydrate, then more, then more, then more. In the 4th quartile, they take the maximum carbohydrate. And just plot the diabetes prevalence in this group, that group, this group, this group. It's a cross-sectional study, but just plot it. You will find that as the carbohydrate goes up, and you take the first quartile as having the odds ratio of 1, it goes up almost 4.5 times, which means if the prevalence of diabetes is, say, 6 here, it will become 25 or 28 there in the 4th quartile. Okay. If it is 10 here, it becomes 40 there. Okay. So that is the increase in prevalence of diabetes. And this is not related to more obesity. You may say because they eat more carbohydrate, they are more obese, and that is why they are getting diabetes. No, we have corrected for age, gender, body mass index, family history of diabetes, cigarette smoking, alcohol, physical activity, income. Everything has been corrected. Okay. And additional adjustment done for dietary fiber and so on. So with that, we're able to see that with carbohydrate intake, the diabetes rates are going up 4.5 times. Now, if you look at glycemic index, again, it is going up. If you look at glycemic load, almost 4.5 times again. Now, what would you expect? With dietary fiber, increasing dietary fiber, the diabetes should go down if your hypothesis is correct. That's exactly what we found. In fact, in the 4th quartile, where if the 4th quartile of dietary fiber, where they take maximum dietary fiber, the prevalence of diabetes had gone down by 69%. There's a 69% decrease in diabetes here if you take more fiber. So exactly as one would expect, we got the data, okay, with fiber being inversely related and all the others, carbohydrate, glycemic load, glycemic index being directly proportional to the diabetes prevalence in our population. So we therefore concluded that in urban South Indians, total dietary carbohydrate and glycemic load are associated with increased and dietary fiber with decreased risk of type 2 diabetes. Now, this is published. This is the first paper in this. And but the problem is, in a epidemiological study which of a cross-sectional nature, whatever you correct for, there could be other confounders we don't even know about. And therefore, it is really not a cause and effect relationship. It's only an association. You can only say this is more rice intake is associated with more diabetes. If you want to really prove it, you have to do incidence studies. And what we mean by incidence studies is, when you start off, there is no diabetes, but you have taken the diet of the population. As you go forward, people develop diabetes, new onset diabetes, okay? That is incident diabetes. And that, if it is more in those who ate rice earlier, then you can prove it. So that's what is the study on the incidence of diabetes. This took another 10 years for us to do, because for this, not only in India, but first of all, you have to have enough incident new onset cases. For that, you need a really huge population. I was very lucky to work with my good friend, Dr. Salim Yusuf, from the McMaster University in Toronto and Hamilton, where the pure study, the prospective urban, the cures is ours, is Chennai Urban Rural Epidemiological Study. There's a large study, international study called PURE, the Prospective Urban Rural Epidemiological Study. This study started in India, in St. John's. And then quickly after that, within few months, Chennai joined, Chandigarh joined, Trivandrum joined, and Jaipur joined. So we have 5 centers. When we finished India and had about 40,000-50,000 people in the study, Salim then got more ambitious. And he said, oh, let's bring in China. Let's bring in Middle East. Let's bring in Europe. Let's bring in Canada. Let's bring in. So he went on and on and on. And today, PURE is the largest epidemiological study ever done in the world. Today, it includes 21 countries from 5 continents and has over 200,000 people who are followed for more than 15 years. And that's why most of the papers from PURE are either in New England Journal, Lancet, and so on. So as part of that, we very recently published, I took the lead in this. All the diabetes part of PURE is the one I handle. Balaji Bavadarani is my student who was earlier did a PhD with me and now worked with Salim Yusuf. So I proposed to Salim that we take it up. And so Bavadarani and I were the first authors, joint first authors in this paper. And so I said, Salim, let's answer this question, whether white rice intake is related to incident type 2 diabetes. So we've worked on this for the last 1 year, and exactly 2 months ago, this got published in Diabetes Care. This paper has been making a lot of noise because it's the first prospective study to prove that white rice intake is related to incident diabetes. Exactly what Swami had told me 13 years ago. It has taken 13 years for us to prove what Swami had said. This particular study involves 132,000 people in 21 countries, including South Asia, Africa, Europe, Canada, and so on. Now, this is the rice consumption in these countries. This is from this paper. So if you look at the rice consumption in South Asia includes India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So if you look at the rice consumption of cooked rice, it is 630 grams per day. 630 grams. It kind of doubles more than 2.5 times when you cook it. So cooked rice is 630 grams per day is the average in South Asia. Now, earlier studies in China had shown that rice intake is directly linked to type 2 diabetes in China. But what's happened in China is the rice intake has started going down. They're not eating that much rice now. They are eating lots more of vegetables, lots more of protein. Of course, they eat a lot of meat in China. So the carbohydrate has actually gone down and the rice consumption has gone down. In fact, China is in 3rd place now as far as rice is concerned, only 200 grams per day. The next is Southeast Asia. So we have Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on in this. And that is a little higher than China. But look at South Asia. We are really on top. Okay. And the rest of the places hardly eat rice. Middle East, South America, Africa, Europe, you see, 0 almost rice. And then overall is 128. So this is the rice distribution in the PURE study of different countries. Now, if you look at the incident diabetes, here we calculate what's called as the hazards ratio to see how many actually convert to diabetes. So you look at South Asia, the hazards ratio is 1.61 because they eat the maximum number of the max amount of rice. So 61% increase in the risk of type 2 diabetes after adjusting for every single thing that you can adjust for. About 20, 30 confounding factors have already been adjusted for. Very tough to get this paper published, but we did. And then 61% increase in diabetes was shown, and it's highly significant. China, on the other hand, there was only a very slight increase in the risk of diabetes. That's because their intake has been drastically reduced. They've also started exercising more, and their carbohydrate consumption has actually gone down. If you put all the rest of the world together, including Southeast Asia, it is still significant. And if you put the whole thing together, including China, it is still significant. So yes, the answer is rice intake is associated with new onset diabetes, but it also depends on how much rice you take. Rice is not a poison. It's the amount of rice which is detrimental. Now we may ask, what happens if you exercise? You take rice, but then you're also exercising. We had that in Pure in this paper. Now, if you take those who are physically inactive and were taking rice, the risk is 50% higher. Okay, but if you are physically very active, you're doing a lot of exercise, okay, and you're reducing weight and you're physically active, in spite of taking rice, the risk goes down from 50% to 16%, and statistical significance is now gone. Okay, so almost you have reduced that risk by increasing physical activity. So moral of the story is, if you are going to take rice, you better exercise and exercise well. And if you do that, your risk of developing diabetes can come down. The problem is, in South Asia, we don't do that. We don't do enough exercise. And that's the reason why the risk remains very high. So it's potentially modifiable. So the conclusion of this paper was that higher consumption of white rice is associated with an increased risk of incident diabetes, with the strongest association being observed in South Asia, while in other regions a modest, non-significant association was seen. This non-significant, one of the reviewers was from China, or was a Chinese guy. I think he is from Harvard, and he made me write, because he wants to say that in China it is no longer significant. So 4 times he made me change the paper until I wrote that, in other regions it is non-significant. He wanted me to write. So we actually wrote that to get it published. What about places in India where rice is not taken? So that's the next question. There are, okay, in Bombay and in Delhi, rice is not taken. Well, it's not rice alone. It is carbohydrate, which is the important. That's why my title, I didn't put it rice, I put it as carbohydrate. Now, there's a study done by Shashank Joshi and colleagues recently, where they looked at the carbohydrate intake in different parts of India. This is a study, clinic-based study, where they looked at North India, South, East, West, Central India. And you can see that the carbohydrate intake is the same, whether it's in South India 66%, Central India 70%, West India 66%, North India 67%, and East India 65%. So there is no difference. In East and in South, it is rice, whereas in these places, it is wheat. So polished wheat is exactly the same as polished rice. Okay, and if it's not polished rice, if it is brown rice, it is definitely healthier. Similarly, whole grain wheat is definitely better than the polished wheat. Now, in India, we actually have very detailed information about diet. We haven't published any of this. They are still going on. But in general, if you see the rice eating parts of India, the prevalence of diabetes is 10%. In the wheat eating part, it is 7.7%. We can't really make out, because this may be due to socioeconomic differences. South India, which is more rice eating, is also socioeconomically more developed. So it could be due to that. We haven't done the exact studies there. But then we have data on the rice consuming belts of India, as well as the wheat consuming belts of India. And 3 or 4 states still, the analysis still going on. So when you finish it, we'll be able to actually look at state by state and see how much the rice is contributing to the diabetes prevalence of that particular state. Now let me move on to bad carbs and good carbs. And what are the recommendations that we have to increase, to reduce the white rice intake? Now, so far we talked about the quantity of carbohydrate, but the quality of carbohydrates is also important. That is where we talk about the good carbs and the bad carbs. So the bad carbs are obviously the sweetened drinks or fruit juices, the highly polished white rice, white bread, cookies, pastry, cake, ice creams, candy, chocolate, except for dark chocolate, potato chips, French fries, and so on. You may say all the good things in life that we like, you put under bad carbs. Unfortunately, they're all carbs. And any one of them by itself is probably okay. But when we combine all of these and make our entire diet only carbohydrate, the body is not able to tolerate. In fact, I must tell you that in that interview, Swami didn't even just stop with the rice, just saying it is rice, and he didn't leave it like that. He gave the entire pathophysiological explanation. I was just sitting and watching him like that. Then he said, he turned around after asking me that and telling me it's rice. He turned around to the rest of the people in the interview and he said, you know what happens when you take more white rice? And everybody is, what happens is the what is called glycemic index that will go up. And once that goes up, what happens? Big strain on the pancreas, on the islet beta cells, pancreas, it gets a big load. So then what happens? The pancreas has to produce more and more insulin. So when it produces more and more insulin, what will happen? The insulin gets drained out. And after some time, the body is not able to produce any insulin. And that is why the insulin level goes down. And that's why you get diabetes. The entire pathophysiology he explained. Beautifully explained. I'm simply looking at him like that. Whatever Swami said is there in my discussion. The entire discussion of my latest paper has that whole thing which Swami said, and it has got published now. Okay, so these are the bad carbs. But are there good carbs? Yes, there are good carbs. If you take vegetables, don't forget that vegetables also contain carbs. Lower quantity, but they contain carbs. Whole fruits, okay, particularly the lower GI ones. You take apple or you take guava. They are all carbohydrate. They contain fructose, but they are lower in GI and they're high in fiber. Therefore, you can take legumes, kidney beans, beans, Bengal gram, green gram, black gram, lentils. All of them contain carbohydrate, but they also contain protein. And therefore, they are very healthy. They're slow release carbs. Nuts, walnuts, almonds, hazelnuts. They contain fiber, they contain protein, they contain monounsaturated fat, but they also contain carbohydrate. Seeds, sunflower seeds, chia seeds, pumpkin seeds, all these also contain some amount of carbohydrate. And then finally, whole grains such as brown rice, steel cut oats, quinoa, or whole grain wheat. If you are able to take that whole wheat or the brown rice, these are all good carbs. So they are carbs, but they are still good carbs. The last part is therefore, what are the recommendations to reduce this white rice intake? So we did some studies. First of all, we looked at the white rice. Then we looked at brown rice. Brown rice is not available in the market. So we have to go to the farmers and stop them from milling it, get the hand pounded rice, the brown rice back. And then some of them had under milled the rice. That means they're not fully polished. The white rice is 12% polish. So we went to people who had only 6% polish, okay, as compared to the unpolished brown rice. You can see that the GI comes down from 79 for white rice, almost 80. 100 is for glucose and white bread. This is almost 80. To under milled rice, which is 73, so still quite high. Brown rice is only 57, if you take the reference of glucose being 100. So what we published was that even minimal polishing of Indian parboiled rice leads to increased glycemic response. If you really want, you should not mill it at all. You should take the old hand-pounded rice. That was something which we showed. The other thing we showed was what happens to white rice, brown rice, and with brown rice we had legumes. What happens to the blood glucose responses and insulin response? This is a randomized clinical trial which we did. We did continuous glucose monitoring. So we fitted a sensor and did the continuous glucose monitoring day after day after day after consumption of either white rice or brown rice. The white rice is shown in red. You can see how the glucose levels are increasing, surging when you take the white rice, whereas when you take the brown rice, there is a blunting of the responses. So you can see it's blunted there. Now, if you add legumes, then further it comes down. The brown rice is actually this black one, and the blue one, even lower, is the one if you add legumes. So if you add legumes, look at this. From there, you're able to blunt the postprandial responses because you're adding fiber and you're adding protein. And once you do that, it comes down. The glycemic excursions come down. And you're able to prove this using the continuous glucose monitoring. So we concluded that consumption of brown rice in place of white rice can help to reduce the 24-hour glucose and fasting insulin responses among overweight Indians. And then we did a trial. This is in collaboration with Harvard. So where we did this trial where we substituted brown rice for white rice and looked at all the metabolic parameters. We looked at glucose levels, insulin levels, body weight, waist circumference, HDL cholesterol, triglycerides, everything we did in a proper RCT. Now, what we found was that in those with metabolic syndrome, you see that there was, if you take brown rice, there was a significant reduction in the HbA1c, whereas if you don't have metabolic syndrome, you're a thin person, you don't have overweight, you don't have any other risk factors, then there is not much of a change. But in those with the metabolic syndrome, those who are at high risk, there is a definite improvement if you take brown rice. So substituting brown rice for white rice showed a potential benefit on HbA1c among participants with metabolic syndrome. We also had data on all the other parameters. And therefore, to conclude, I would like to say that excess refined carbohydrates are associated with increasing prevalence as well as incidence of type 2 diabetes in India. Most of our studies have been done in Chennai, but we now have data from the rest of India as well. Changing from polished white rice to brown rice can have beneficial effects. Alternatively, restricting the carbohydrate intake to about 40. Today, we take 65–70% carbohydrate. If we are able to restrict it to about 45%, allow sufficient protein, about 20%, and then include monounsaturated fats, good fats. Fats are also good, bad, and ugly. So if you take the good fats in the form of monounsaturated fats for 30–35%, this is the best diet to prevent diabetes. So some of you may ask during the question time, what about keto diet? So why don't we go to zero carbohydrate diet? Those will be unbalanced and it's not sustainable in the long run. But we will talk about that during question time. I think that's my last slide. Om Jai Sai Ram. So I'll stop there. And as I said, this talk has direct relevance to what Swami has taught me. In all honesty, I had simply not even thought about rice in my studies. But for Swami, I would never have done this. But it went to the extent of going on and on and on. We still haven't finished. So much of work, only 5 minutes in an interview changed my whole life. And it even went to the extent of us producing a healthier variety of rice, producing brown rice, and making it a commercial success. So many things happened in the last 10 to 15 years, thanks to the divine intervention of Swami in an interview. So I must pay my respects to him again and my pranams to him for guiding me in this field. I'm going to stop sharing now, and then if there are any questions, we can take.
Thank you, sir. It was definitely a very revealing and elaborate, scientifically carried out work to bring out the correlation between carbohydrates and diabetes with solid proof, so that people can now take charge and be more clear on how to go about and not be on the fence. And so that was very, very important, especially for South Indians or for among Indians itself, because what was very beautiful in your talk, which I felt was like very rarely have come across such a revealing historical account of the increasing prevalence of diabetes in India. That we don't usually come across that. So it kind of wakes up the people in general as well as the healthcare providers. And definitely the incidence of diabetes, which you have already shown, which is again a very difficult thing to do, such huge epidemiological studies. I can understand the amount of the effort and time that would have gone in and the big groups that would have been involved in coordinating it. And also for very holistically putting in, like we can never say something is totally bad, and we need to give a kind of idea of how to balance it, because we are so used to white rice. Probably sometimes I feel we are addicted to it, including myself. So unless we have few grains of white rice, we are never satisfied. So you nicely put it, how to do it, how to balance it, how to alternate the white rice and give it little, and what combination to go in for so that we can still handle it. And very importantly, the role of physical activity for such people, so that they can still enjoy a little bit of that white rice and then still go on without getting into pre-diabetes and diabetes. And another important point which I felt was through all your studies, the incidence of pre-diabetes. So there is yes, that is an alarming thing, but at the same time, it also gives us a scope to focus our intervention. That is a crucial stage at which if we have a very strong intervention, both diet and lifestyle. So there is and hopefully that prediction of 2025-35,
Yeah.
we should be able to reverse it.
Reverse.
That should be the goal of all the nutritionists and doctors put together to reverse or not to, go as per the prediction. This prediction we should definitely stop.
Yeah.
So in this regard, there are a couple of questions from the participants. Sir. One of them have asked how to motivate people to change lifestyle. So because you must be doing it on a day-to-day basis in your clinic all around, so you must be having some good strategy to motivate people to change their lifestyle, especially with respect to physical activity. Could you share some tips on that?
It's not easy. Let me tell you, it has to come from within. Whatever we tell, unless people are motivated themselves to do it, they will do it if there is any. If you tell a person that, okay, you're going to get pregnant now, and therefore your weight is more. So if you if you're overweight, your child will suffer or something like that. Immediately they are prepared to do anything they want. Somebody is getting married, they want to look better, so they want to reduce their weight and they will do it. Okay, something which motivates them to do it, they will do it. Or for some other reason, or if they get scared, if you tell them your kidney is showing some changes, if you don't lose weight now, you don't control your diabetes, you don't cut down, don't start exercising, it's bad for you, then people do that. Some will continue. I mean, if you start that in 100 people, 30 of them will, 25 of them will probably continue. Another 30 to 40% will do it for some time and then they'll give up. Another 20%, whatever you say, they will not listen to you at all. You cannot make them change. So behavioral therapy is not easy. And as you said, rice again, it's almost impossible to change the entire eating habits of. In fact, it was my father who introduced rice in 1958. He started saying, because he had a different concept. He used to say that a lot of legumes have to be consumed, and his diet, which I worked with him in the early days, was called high carbohydrate, high protein, high fiber diet. HC, HP, HF diet. So he said, without the fiber, you cannot take the rice. But he said, why should everybody in South India take chapati and everybody in North India take rice just because they will eat less of it? That's a cruel way of doing it, he said. So he said, let us allow people to eat rice, but then they should cut down the quantity. So the principle, so I'll make it very simple for you as far as the diet part. Then I'll come to the physical activity part. So the diet part is, when we take a plate, the plate concept, what do? We first put the rice in that. Then we have rice and rasam, or rice and sambar. Then we have rice and rasam. Then we have rice and curd, or rice and buttermilk. Like that, first course, second course, third course, fourth course goes on. That's how the carbohydrate becomes a mountain of rice. You count the whole thing together, a mountain of rice. And people think anything lower than that, their energy level is going to go. Okay, well, carbohydrate is definitely needed for energy. It's one of the sources of energy, no doubt about it. But if we start changing our eating habit by saying that we are not eating enough vegetables, we are not getting enough iron, we're not getting enough minerals, vitamins, and we're not getting enough protein. So when we sit to eat, morning, afternoon, night, first look for, where is my protein? So if you have Bengal gram, green gram, black gram, whatever that you're taking, any source of protein, it doesn't matter. It can be milk, it can be anything, paneer. But that portion of protein should form a quarter of the plate. There should be vegetables with every meal. That means, suppose in the morning, you can have tomato or cucumber, any salad, anything cut and thing, and that forms a good portion of your plate. And then only the rest of it should be for carbohydrate. So if you're having idli, 1 or 2 idlis probably is okay. But you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you go on, then your carb is going to go really high. And when you mix this, you will find it's quite filling, okay? And then you don't feel hungry at all. When you sit for lunch, have 2 vegetables and then fill up this half of that plate with the 2 vegetables. You want to have a dilute soup or something, you can have. You want a buttermilk, you can have. You want to have a bowl of curd, you can have. Then you have a portion which is reserved for protein. So you must get either Bengal gram or green gram or black gram or any of those, rajma or something which fills up that quarter of the plate. And then the remaining portion, what is left, you put your rice there. And if you do that, you will find you have much more energy, much more health, because you're getting your vitamins, your minerals, your iron, your whatever you think of, your zinc and whatever you want will come from those items that you have. Plus, there is some carbohydrate. That is why I said don't eliminate carbs completely. That is what the other extreme people are doing now. Keto diet, paleo diet, this diet, that diet, low carb diet. Everybody is now on to that because they want quick results. In 2-3 months' time, you lose 10 kilos, 15 kilos. How many of them will keep those 10 kilos down after 6 months, 1 year, 2 years? Almost 99% will revert back. So what is the point? You're getting a yo-yo effect. Your weight goes from 70 to 60, 60 to 72, then again to 58, then again to, that is bad. Your body's immunity itself is getting destroyed. I'm sure Dr. Sanjeevi, who's a very big immunologist, will tell you that it's not good. Rather than that, from 70, you bring it to 68, from 68, you bring it to 66, and you keep it there. That is a healthier way than to do this. So these extreme diets are not very good, because you eliminate carbohydrate, you'll end up with 100% fat, or not 100, let's say 10-15% protein, almost 70-80% fat you'll end up with. Your LDL cholesterol will go up, your cholesterol will go up, your lipids will go up, your coronary arteries will start getting narrowed with the fat deposits. So that is also not good. Eliminating fat completely, I'll completely eliminate fat because it is good. Fat is needed for synthesis of cholesterol, for your liver function, for everything. Some amount of fat is needed. Only thing, the healthy fats you should take, not saturated fat, not trans fats, little bit of polyunsaturated fat, but more of monounsaturated fat. That is what we don't have. The omega-3 is what we don't have. We take too much omega-6. So these healthy things, if we keep in mind, you can have a balanced diet that can go on throughout next 20 years. You can follow a diet pattern like that. Since this lockdown came, I've lost 5 kilos. I cut down my carbs. Not that I had a lot of weight to lose, but I thought, no, even that 3-4 kilos, which is, if I cut down, it's good. I was easily able to do it. And now 6 months has passed, and I have no ideas of going back to the thing. I've cut down my carbs. In the morning, I hardly eat any. I've stopped eating dosa, idli, and all for breakfast for the last 15-20 years now. I have some cut fruit. I have a glass of milk and some salads. That's very good. And afternoon also, I have very little rice. In spoons I take rice, but I take a lot of vegetables, a lot of grams. And so that's very, very healthy. It keeps me very energetic, and it doesn't put on weight, and the lipids are under control. Everything is under control. Weight is so easy to maintain. And it's a diet which you can enjoy and you can have. So I think any diet that you follow should be sustainable. With respect to physical activity, it's even more difficult. The best thing is to join a group. If you have a group of walking friends with whom you walk, or you make it pleasurable. You like dancing, put on some music and then dance away if you're a dancer. Or if you enjoy swimming or something, which you do something which you enjoy. If it's games, you can play badminton, you can play something or something. If you have a group which will keep you going, hey, where are you? You haven't come. They'll call you in the morning and then see that you go. Then you are motivated to do that. The other thing that you can do to keep up exercise is to put your pedometer thing on your phone, the 10,000 steps. And it is something which will every day will tell you whether you're keeping up those. Even if you don't do 10,000 steps, even 6,000, 7,000, whatever you do is good. But if you don't do it at all, you will end up with 1,000 steps a day or 1,500 steps a day, which is totally sedentary, which is the sitting is the new smoking, they say. It can lead to heart attacks, deep vein thrombosis. So many things can come due to that. And so motivate yourself by doing something like that, which keeps you going. And then once you start doing it, you will feel the difference. And add 5 to 10 minutes of deep breathing, a little meditation, Jyoti meditation, which Swami has taught us. If you do that, you're so calm and quiet. You never get flustered. You're able to control your emotions much better. So then you will start experiencing the joy of living. That is what you should do.
Thank you, sir, for such an elaborate answer. And there are few more questions. Since we have been talking about good carbohydrates, there are 3-4 people who have asked about millets. What about millets as good carbs, especially is ragi? Taking these millets such as ragi daily a good thing?
Yeah. So Swami has, in fact, in that same interview, he told me I take sangati. I didn't know what is sangati. And
Right.
then Swami, do you know what is Sangati? He asked me. I said, I don't know, Swami. Ragi balls, that is what Swami takes, he said. He told me, I have little sugar, but it's all controlled. I take ragi balls, and so I'm very well controlled, he said. So ragi is good, there's no doubt. Ragi is a little more slow release. The quality of the protein is good. So if you like ragi, you can definitely take it. Millets of the old were very, very healthy. No doubt that they have so many phytonutrients and so many flavonoids, so many things. The millets of the old were very good. But today, the problem with millets is they're all polished, completely polished. So we have published 2-3 papers now showing the high, we have done zoom microscopy and we've done everything on this millets. We've studied in great detail. We have a very active food and nutrition department, as you may know. It's a huge department. We do food analysis, we do epidemiology, we do software to produce this. We look at dietary analysis of all foods. We do food tasting. We do food, for the industry, we do glycemic index testing. Then we do food experiments by food feeding and looking at continuous glucose monitoring. The food department is a very big one at our center. And one of the things we have found that in the market, we go and pick up products and then study it. And the millets which are sold in the market, unfortunately, are high glycemic index, and they're not very different from rice. So if you want to take the millets, take it in the old form as they were doing. They're slowly coming back. There's a movement for millets to be taken. The millets are very healthy. No doubt that they are, even healthier than rice. No doubt about it. People don't like it. They've got used to eating this. So if you're eating rice, then eat little less and substitute it with a lot of protein, a lot of other healthy legumes and so on. Because remember that when you take rice, there is one, amino acid which is deficient in rice totally. And there is one amino acid which is deficient in grams totally. But the one which is absent in rice is excess in the legumes, and one which is absent in the legumes is excess in rice. If you combine these two, you don't have any amino acid deficiency. You're getting first-class protein, just like a non-vegetarian protein. So this is something Swami again taught me. Vegetarians also can have good quality protein, and also Swami has told me. A lot of things about diet Swami has taught me. So.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. You have re-emphasized the fact about protein complementation or amino acid complementation through our diets, like pongal or khichdi.
Yes.
When we try to balance the amino acids together, that is really nice. Sir, any comments about basmati rice? Because some people have been telling that basmati rice is low GI and
No, that's not true at all. I don't think any white rice is low GI. In fact, they say that the Kerala red rice is low GI. Yeah. They say it's like brown rice. No. Red is only a pigmentation. So of course, a little more, swollen kind of a rice. Digestibility is probably a little bit more. Satiety is probably a little bit more when you take that. But the glycemic index, we have tested about 200, 250 varieties of rice. There is no difference at all. And I won't say that the basmati rice is lower. If at all, it's slightly higher in GI. Of course, it's very good tasting and it's very nice. And if that is what you like on some days, there's nothing preventing you from taking it. Again, it's a quantity. But it's not, definitely it's not low GI. There are some varieties of rice, which one which we had also produced. And then there are others. Now we are trying to work with the Tamil Nadu Agricultural University. In the library, they have strains of rice which are high in resistant starch, and their amylose content is high. Amylopectin, amylose content is high. So if you use those varieties of rice, the carbs are broken down slowly. Those have to be cultivated, they have to be grown, and then they have to be encouraged, and then they have a much higher fiber and lower GI. The problem with that rice variety, even our own, we have now stopped the production. The problem is they mutate. After some time, they mutate. We have to grow it under specific conditions, and then they mutate and they become like ordinary rice after some time. So it's very difficult to maintain the quality of that and to keep on going. So right now, our rice is actually, we stopped the production, because you're not able to proceed with it. It needs a very detailed scientific mind to do that. Full time, you have to work on that.
So what about fruit intake? Too many fruit intakes, will it not shoot up the sugar level? That is one of the questions.
It will. That is why if you don't have diabetes, there is no limit to the number of fruits. You can take 4 or 5 fruits also per day. I take about 4 or 5 fruits. Luckily, I don't have diabetes. So I take 4 or 5 fruits per day. And that's very good for me. That's a very good source of all my antioxidants and everything that I need. If you have diabetes, You must remember that fructose is there in fruits, and that gets converted into glucose after it enters into the body. And therefore, take low GI fruits and take one or two. You can have apple, you can have guava, you can take papaya, oranges, the ones which slightly lower GI compared to the higher GI ones. So if you're able to take the lower GI ones and take one or two fruits per day is okay for a person with diabetes. People ask, what about mango? You know, in mango season, we want to eat mango. Well, if you technically look at the mango GI, it's only 53 or something like that. So technically, it's only a low GI. But those who eat mango, ripe mango, sugar shoots up because of the quantity. The glucose, the glycemic index may be low, but the glycemic load will go up. So what I tell people is, okay, you want to take mango, take a few pieces of mango, not the whole mango. Okay, take a few pieces so that you feel that you've taken the mango. Instead of being deprived, oh, I didn't eat mango, So you can take a little bit of mango. Second, you want to eat the whole mango, skip the rice that day. Lunch, you have only vegetables, have soup, and have one mango. Nothing wrong. Have the full mango. Have two mangoes you want. Okay, but don't take any other carb at that time. You know, take buttermilk, take some vegetables, and take two mangoes. So you have made up your carbohydrate there. But if you take your full lunch, and then on top of that, you take one mango, two mango, your sugar is going to go very, very high. People without diabetes, no problem, because they're able to tolerate their glycemic load, and their insulin secretory apparatus is so good that nothing happens if they take. So those who have diabetes, you have to have some limit on all carbs, including fruits. But you can take, it's not that you should not take. Vegetables are unlimited. Vegetables are unlimited.
So one more question on stress. Is there any correlation found between stress and diabetes incidence?
Oh, there's a lot of correlation. So stress, see, depression is something you can easily measure. Stress is more difficult to measure. Depression, there are a number of scores, Beck's depression score and the PHQ-9, and there are many, many indices. And when you measure stress, you can measure it much more accurately. And one of my, the person who is in our ethics committee of the Sri Sathya Sai University, Pungode. So she did her PhD on depression and diabetes. She had 5 excellent publications on that, directly showing that stress can lead to diabetes. Depression basically can lead to diabetes. Stress is something which we all have. Okay, the 2 minutes when I got a little late for this thing itself, I got stressed. I had to go run there, this thing, that thing. That kind of stress will not, produce diabetes and so on. It's just a little anxiety, stress, which will settle down. But if you have severe stress, somebody dies, you're not able to get over that. Your sleep is gone, everything is gone, your brain is, completely gone for a 6. That kind of a income tax raid, something happens, you lose your job, something like that, something which really shakes you up, can produce diabetes. I've seen people who are normal, suddenly the sugar goes up, it becomes very, very high. For months together, they have it. And then slowly the stress settles down and the sugar comes down. So the entity called stress-induced diabetes is a real entity. And COVID is a very good example. The stress of COVID itself produced diabetes for many people. Okay, but it is reversible. And that is where pranayama, meditation, all these things, the stress control, breathing, deep breathing. Swami taught us Jyoti meditation. So doing all that every day will definitely help to control the stress. So yes, uncontrolled stress and severe stress can produce diabetes. In those with diabetes, it can increase the sugars. That's what happens when you use steroids. And again, going back to COVID, we are seeing patients whose blood sugars were normal, suddenly coming with 500, 400. They had COVID, they treated with dexamethasone, the sugar shoots up, and then after 3 weeks, 4 weeks, when the steroid is stopped, it comes down again. And that's a classic stress hormone. What you're giving, steroid is a classic stress release factor, and that can increase the sugar.
Thank you for clarifying that. Sir, one more question is, like, if diabetes runs in a family, then which age we should be looking for signs for diabetes in the children? Like when we should start testing? Okay.
Before that, I have in a lighter vein, I used to say that it's not that diabetes runs in your family. Diabetes comes because nobody runs in your family.
Yes, that's very true.
That's a famous quote,
Oh, yes,
if nobody runs in your family, you get diabetes. But then having said that, it depends on the family history. Suppose father and mother, I showed you the figures by age 60, almost 50% are having diabetes and 20% are having pre-diabetes. 70% of the population itself is going to get diabetes. We're going to publish another paper in Diabetologia quite soon, where we are showing the lifetime risk of getting diabetes based on our incidence studies and so on. It's frightening. More than 90% of Indians will develop diabetes in their lifetime. Okay. And that's a kind of risk. If you don't have diabetes, you're one of the exceptions. If you're an Indian and you're in an urban area and you don't get, and if you're overweight, it's almost sure you will get diabetes. So if your father and mother are diabetic, very few people I've seen above the age of 50 who don't have diabetes. Over 90-95% risk if both your parents are diabetic. So then why should you, by 50 already 90% is diabetic, you should start say by about age 20 at least, if not earlier. It even comes earlier. Nowadays coming at 12, 14, 15, children coming obese with diabetes. So I have so many below 20 years of age. I have hundreds of children now. Who got, my youngest type 2 diabetic, I'm not talking about type 1 insulin dependent diabetic. I'm talking about type 1 diabetic is 7 years old, 7 years old. I've got about 6 children below 10 who got type 2 diabetes. So it comes at any age. So if you are obese and so on, start even in adolescence screening. Otherwise, age 20 should be the latest if you have a family history. If you have no family history at all, father is not diabetic, mother is not diabetic, grandparent not diabetic, you don't know anyone in the family, then by age 30, you should start screening, because age itself is one of the factors which produces diabetes in Indians. So by age 30 for everyone, if you have family history 20, if you have very strong family history and the child is overweight, start even in adolescence, even in, by school itself, at least a simple blood test or a HbA1c, one blood test at least, a fasting at least, you can do to see whether they have early signs of diabetes. But we are surprised to find triglycerides going up, HDL going down, all happening in adolescence.
There's one question, I don't know how far it is related. What's Sir's opinion on golden rice?
I have not heard much about golden rice.
I don't think it has any correlation with it.
What is this golden rice?
This is actually a genetically modified rice, sir, which was modified for producing more of beta carotene or vitamin A. So I think it does not have much relevance with respect to diabetes. Or
I have not heard much about it.
And another question is about black rice. I think that's similar to...
That is again pigmented. I know some data was presented in some of the ethics committees, and I've had discussion about it, because they were saying it has anti-diabetic property. That is what, when it was presented, I said, see, if you say it doesn't go up, glycemic property is low, if we do the GI testing and prove it, that's fine. But somebody from your group had presented at one of the ethics committee meeting, which I chaired, saying that if you take this black rice, your diabetes will go away. You can use it in the treatment of diabetes, anti-diabetic drug, and so on. So I said, that's too much of a claim, unless you really have evidence that, because I said, in that case, everybody will get hypoglycemia. If a person takes that and it has insulin-like property and all. So I said, in that case, everybody who's eating it should be getting hypoglycemia, and that doesn't seem to happen. So.
Yes, sir. But we have done, sir, and it has shown a hypoglycemic activity in the sense of low GI. Compared to white rice.
Hypoglycemia, what they presented as say lower GI. Lower GI is possible. In fact, you should now take the lead to look at different varieties of rice. I am sure there are varieties of rice there which have very low GI.
Yes, sir, we have published
45, 50, 55, that's good enough. So much difference it makes. So if this variety of rice, why don't you send me some? I asked them at that time to send me some varieties of that. Let me have a look at it and then see its thing. If that rice is there, we should promote it actually.
Yes, we have. So we have done for 3 varieties.
Okay.
And we have come out with the low GI. We have done it in human subjects only.
Excellent.
We did a in vitro first and then followed up with in vivo study.
Very good. Then that must be promoted and encouraged. So
please communicate.
Give me some data on that. No?
Yeah, definitely, sir. This is again one more question which you already covered, sir. What we should replace rice on our plate with? That you already said. That
all gram, green gram, black gram, vegetables, salads, or anything else other than very high carbs. So more protein, more fiber.
So one more question from my side, sir. Like when we talk about fiber, is there any difference in the fiber which we get from vegetables and fruits, from cereals, and the legume fiber with respect to glycemic response?
Well, there is what is called as soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. So you can classify it as soluble and insoluble. I think at the end of the day, fiber is fiber. So the different forms of fiber may be there, but ultimately they kind of trap the carbohydrate, isn't it? That is a principle. that
Yes.
in the gut, the carbohydrate is kind of trapped by
So-
using the fiber. The more fiber you have, the carbohydrate is released more slowly. So I don't think it matters what type of fiber that you take, but just include fiber in all forms.
What about food supplements? One of the questions they've asked. There are many.
Meal replacements, kind
I
of.
think they are asking, I think, food supplements which are promoted for diabetes.
So some example of that, if you give, I'll know what exactly they had in mind.
I-
So one of the thing is, oh, you mean things like chromium and those kind of supplements, whether they have a direct effect on diabetes. Chromium is supposed to be contain a glucose tolerance factor, or GTF. The evidence for all this is very weak. But fenugreek is something which you can definitely supplement. Studies from NIN have shown very good response to methi. So fenugreek methi as a supplement is excellent. You can add it along with the food, and it definitely reduces the postprandial glucose responses. Things like Karela and all that are supplements. The evidence is there. It's not very strong, but no harm in taking it. Again, it's a vegetable. You can take it. Then there are, some of the spices and cinnamon and all these are supposed to have some benefit. There are studies which show some beneficial effect. I would say whatever is going to help you, in the to anything which is supposed to have been good, and if it's a food product, use it, add it on to your thing. Similarly, seeds are also very good. They're supposed to have flax seeds and
Yes.
pumpkin seeds, and all these are supposed to be very good. So those can also be added on. So anything in food form which is allowed as a food supplement, don't even hesitate if it is going to help you to go ahead with that.
So I
But
think
anything
turmeric
else,
also fall
and
under
even as
this.
a meal replacement. Now, suppose you have a supplement which is a meal replacement. So it's also good because it comes in a fixed amount of calories. Let's say you have a protein drink, which is very high in protein and at the same time slow carbohydrate, and it's in a mixed proportion, which is very healthy. Now, if you take that and then you skip your lunch, okay, then you're sure that only 140 calories has gone in. When you start eating other food, it's difficult to control. So let's say 200 calories you have reduced in that particular meal. Over a month, 8,000 calories you have reduced. So with that one thing, you can lose 1 kg. 8,000 calories is 1 kg loss. So you can lose 1 kg just with that one meal replacement. And there's nothing no harm in it if it's a healthy meal replacement prepared by a proper study and so on. So you can do that. If people are overweight and they need to do that, or the sugar is not getting under control, then they can try all these.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. I just would like to convey the points of appreciation the various participants have given, that it is interesting, informative, elaborate, educative, and so on. So many adjectives they have given, and they're very thankful for your such a very scholarly recitation of this particular topic, which is quite important and relevant for us. And before we close, I really once again want to thank on part of the
If our Vice Chancellor is there, Dr. Sanjeevi, if you're there, you want to say,
organizers
can I-
as well as from the viewer. Yes,
is
sir.
the Vice Chancellor still there? Or Dr. Sanjeevi, if you're there, if you'd like to say some concluding remarks, he's probably not there. That's okay.
Somebody is
Oh,
muted.
there is. Yeah.
Very good. Now I could unmute myself.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've been with, I mean, it's fantastic talk, Mohan. It's as usual, I've heard you talk so many times. But what I feel really, really interesting is that the amount of information you shared that is beneficial to the student and faculty of SSIHL is immense. So I thank you extremely for the very nice talk you gave, down to earth, and made it so easy for everybody to understand. So I thank you, and it's all Swami's wishes that we are doing this. You could not attend because of your pressure of time. The earlier the nutrition symposium that Dr. Srividya organized, but you found time to talk to us is something I greatly appreciate. I thank you very much, and this is an excellent talk, and I'm sure there would have been a lot of feedback from to Dr. Srividya about the talk. What we are going to do is this: we have a SSIHL YouTube channel.
No.
We are archiving all the talks now that we are hosting from the SSIHL. So your talk is going to go into the archives, and maybe Srividya can give you the count on the number of people who have viewed it this month, next month, and maybe it will be huge of all the talks we have had. So,
thank you so much. And also, if you send me the link, I can share it with all my groups and teams. And many of the questions which are asked are, good questions. So the answers, I may not have addressed them in earlier webinars and so on. So this will be very useful whenever it's ready. And when you just send the link, I will send it to my nutrition team and so on.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I will definitely do it once as soon as it is.
You could, if you have anything to say, you can end with the prayer.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. We just will have one small vote of thanks by one of our faculty, Dr. Somana. Somana. She'll give the vote of thanks and then we'll end with the prayer.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I think
you have to unmute. You have to unmute.
Unmute, yes.
Sairam, everybody. Sairam, sir. Offering my humble pranams at the lotus feet of our founder Chancellor, Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba. Respected Vice Chancellor, sir. Our guest of honor, Dr. Mohan, sir. Elders, colleagues, research scholars, and students, and all the participants in this webinar. It's indeed a privilege for me to address this vote of thanks on behalf of the Department of Food and Nutritional Sciences for this enlightening webinar. Firstly, we place on record our heartfelt thanks to the guest speaker of the webinar, Dr. V. Mohan, an eminent diabetologist and an ardent devotee of Bhagwan, for accepting our invitation and sharing his valuable knowledge and expertise and professional experience amidst us, keeping aside his extremely busy schedule. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us today. Our sincere thanks to our respected Vice Chancellor, sir, for agreeing to deliver the introductory notes and introduce the esteemed speaker for today. We extend our sincere thanks to our Chancellor, sir, Vice Chancellor, sir, Registrar, sir, and the Controller of Examinations, sir, for their immense support. We would like to thank the Director of Anantapur campus for her constant motivation and encouragement. We would like to extend our warm thankfulness to Dr. N. Srividya, Head, Department of Food and Nutritional Sciences, for her inexplicable leadership, meticulous planning, and coordination, which led to the successful completion of this event. We would like to thank Dr. Tapasya, Ms. Manjula, Ms. Ashita, Ms. Sai Shrutishri, and few other research scholars of the Department of Food and Nutritional Sciences for their valuable assistance extended to Dr. Srividya for organizing this event. We offer our heartfelt gratitude to our founder Chancellor, Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba, for his benevolent grace that ensured the successful culmination of the webinar. Last but not the least, we would like to express our thankfulness to all the students and viewers for their enthusiastic and active participation. We shall now conclude the session with Shanti Mantra. Sairam.
स्वस्ति प्रजाभ्यः परिपालयन्ता न्यायेन मार्गेण महिषाः गोब्राह्मणेभ्यः शुभमस्तु नित्यम् समस्तलोका सुखिनो भवन्तु।